Tonight we're going to look at one work by Grant Wood called Appraisal, which dates from 1931. That is certainly when he finished the work, but he began it actually in very late 1930. And here is the work in question. So it may be familiar to you. It was the first work he did after completing his major work, American Gothic, in later 1930. So this is the first sort of follow-on work that he did. And it was also quite successful. Not quite as successful as American Gothic, which grew to sort of infamy. But this was a very, very well done work. You can see, when you think about American Gothic, you can see the connections between that work immediately prior to this one and this one. And as I said, this one he began in very late 1930. It is actually owned by the Carnegie Stout Public Library in Dubuque, but is on long-term loan to the Dubuque Museum of Art. And is on view there. I have another view of closer, a little bit grainy. I apologize for that image. It's a little bit grainy, but it gives you a little bit better view of it. And you know, it is called appraisal because it is really describing the situation, describing the vibe that's happening between these two women. On the right-hand side, you see a very elegantly dressed woman in a kind of a fur-lined coat with this beautiful cloche hat and this beautiful pin in the hat, and this very elaborately beaded bag, who has come to the farm to select a chicken or rooster for dinner, and she is encountering a farm woman. And so they are, the farm woman is looking directly at her. She's very much appraising, if you will, the city woman, and the city woman is kind of appraising, I think, less the farm woman as it was the potential animal for Sunday dinner. The farm woman is wearing much simpler clothes. She has a wonderful wool sweater on over her top. You see that she also has a hat on, but it's a knitted cap, very practical. And she also has a pin. In this case, it's a safety pin that is holding closed the top of her little jacket there. All set out in a farm scene that you see here. The figures are pressed very much to the front picture plane, similar to the approach that Grant Wood took with American Gothic. And in the background, you have architectural elements that kind of frame the rest of the scene. Again, very similar to the way in which Grant Wood composed American Gothic. Now, it's been a while since I've seen this work in person. This image struck me as being perhaps a little too amber, a little too golden. And I found another image that is probably a little too cool, a little too blue. I think the reality of the piece, and it's been a while since I've seen it, is somewhere in between these two extremes, if you will. But I think that this cooler one gives you a little bit better sense of it. I think it's closer to this cooler tone than it is to the warm tone that you saw, and I think that it aligns very well with this sort of installation shot of a family looking at the work. It also has that kind of a little bit cooler tone that you see here. So I should probably look at my notes now. Now, originally, the composition was larger than you see it now. Here's how it looked shortly after it was completed in 1931. At some point later, Grant Wood cut off the bottom 10 inches, the bottom portion of the painting, the portion with the chicken wire, and changed the name from Appraisal to Clothes. Clothes, because the clothes really kind of define the stature, the status of the two women in question, and it really kind of helps to underscore or underscore the charged space in between them in a way. But that title never stuck. It's always been known as Appraisal. And that is the title that has stayed. Now, of that part, that Grant would cut off, there is one remaining fragment. Now this fragment is of the feet and the button that you see here. It's very small. It's only a 6 by 9 inch fragment. This is in the collection of the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, but we have had it on long-term loan to the Dubuque Museum of Art so that they can display it next to the painting, so that people understand that the painting is not as it was originally painted, but is a cut down version of the original. This painting has a very, very interesting backstory that most people are unaware of, and it came to light fairly recently, and it really revolves around this woman. This is Elizabeth Betty Sanborn, née Rupke. She was born in 1905 in Waterloo, Iowa. She studied at the Iowa State Teachers College in 1925 to 1927. She went to summer school at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1929, and she became an art teacher. And she taught art in Cedar Rapids from 1929 until 1937, when she moved to Omaha. And she taught there from 1938 until the early 1970s and passes away in October of 1975. Having taken summer school at the Art Institute and teaching art classes, she herself was an artist in her own right. After moving to Omaha, she did obtain a bachelor's degree at the University of Omaha in 1945, and her work was exhibited in a large number of different exhibitions, including a solo exhibition at the Joslin Museum of Art in Omaha in 1951. And this is the kind of work that she did here. Two very different examples, both by Betty Sanborn, that you see here, and gives you a sense of the artwork that she created. Why am I sharing with you all this information about Betty Sanborn? What on earth does she have to do with appraisal? Well, in 2011, Wendy Guida contacted me by email. She relayed a story to me that her grandmother, Dorothy Belland, had recently passed away at the age of 97. Grandma Dot, as she was called, was Betty Sanborn's best friend. And when Betty passed away, all of her possessions went to Grandma Dot. And then Grandma Dot's possessions made their way to Wendy Guida, who was interested in art, so it made sense that it would pass to her. And in amongst the things that she received from Betty Sanborn's estate through her Grandma Dot was this photograph, which is a photograph of Betty Sanborn posing as the model for appraisal. And you can see her here holding the chicken in much the same fashion as it appears in the final composition. And Wendy sent along this wonderful scan of the photograph, both the front and the back, where you see here where it says she posed for the picture in November of 1930. Lastwell Studios in Cedar Rapids, Iowa are stamped on the back. Lastwell Studios was at that time a photography studio that could be found in the Paramount Theater here in downtown Cedar Rapids. They still exist and operate under that name, but in a different location now. And here is a nice sort of comparison between that original composition, including the chicken wire fencing at the bottom, and the photograph. You see there have been some minor changes. Betty's hand has moved, the position of her head has moved, the feet of the fowl have changed slightly, but you can see that there's a great sort of connection um, between the two pieces. Now, why is this significant? Well, because over time, interesting stories had developed around the models for appraisal. And a bit of it comes from a book written by Hazel Brown, published in 1972, in which she described the circumstances of the creation of appraisal. But from that original writing, different people had extrapolated different things. So, and I'm going to clarify that in a minute. But I want to share with you what Hazel Brown wrote in her book, and it's a little bit of a passage, but it gives you an interesting backstory in addition to sort of clearly identifying who the model on the left is, and we'll talk about the model on the right in a moment. But in Hazel Brown's book, she talks about the creation of the Little Gallery, which was an experiment that was launched by the Carnegie Corporation to create a place for art and art making away from the coasts. And so the first director of the Little Gallery was a gentleman by the name of Edward, better known as Ed Rowan. And so this is a little bit of what Hazel had to say. So in its earliest days, the Little Gallery offered many excellent traveling shows. Local artists were also featured. But Grant, meaning Grant Wood, Grant felt at one time that not enough was being done for the local talent. Grant, as usual, sought the best in showing for all of the painters of the community, especially those not so well known. And Grant seemed to feel that when he suggested a full local exhibit, Ed had put him off. He promised, but then nothing materialized. Grant was irked. At coffee time in Hobby House, which is what Hazel Brown operated, storefront that she operated, Grant complained about Ed Rowan, how Ed was turning his back on the boys, and how Ed did not have time to talk to him. Over a period of several weeks, we listened, sympathized, and worked up a slight thing about Ed Rowan ourselves. Characteristically, Grant had to do something about it to get it out of his system. And he had some luck. One afternoon, he came into the shop and looked long and hard at Mary. Mary, I have an idea for a picture. Well, fine, but don't look at me. I came across a teacher over at Grant School who looks exactly like Ed Rowan, and you fit perfectly into my idea. The picture we saw and knew as appraisal showed a farm woman in a ragged sweater with a Plymouth Rock hen under her arm, stooping, or rather cringing, as she appraises the tall, haughty woman whose hands a purse drips money. There's no mistaking the face on the farm woman. There was no mistaking Mary either, who is the other figure in this composition. But an unusual thing happened. Mary is no longer here to back me up, but during the picture business, Mary suggested to Grant that he go to Ed, pin him down, and refuse to take no for an answer. He's busy, Grant, and those traveling exhibits keep coming in, but please try again and stick with it. Evidently, Grant did just that, for the next time he was in, he admitted he had followed Mary's advice and said, now I want you to both forget everything I said about Ed. We're friends again and understand each other, and he's going to give the boys an exhibit. We were terribly glad that there was peace between these two fine men, and the picture, which now appears as appraisal, shows a tall, erect, good-looking farm woman, neatly dressed, eyeing that dripping purse in the hands of the haughty woman. We never knew what happened, but it was so like Grant to soften his appraisal after the peace pact with Ed. Grant once asked Mary if she minded what he had done to her. Mary replied, no, Grant, I don't, but I could sure use that purse with the money in it if you would give it back to me. So there is a fascinating story, kind of a backstory behind this single painting, and I have a detail I forgot of Betty Sanborn. But I also have this photograph here, and Ed Rowan is on the right-hand side there. He came to Cedar Rapids in 1928 with his wife, who very much operated the little gallery with him. They came to open the little gallery, which they did at 318 South 3rd Street here in Cedar Rapids in September of that year. The Carnegie Corporation had set aside $50,000, which is quite a sum of money in 1928, to establish an arts program far from the coasts. And that is what Ed Rowan came to do. Here, a little bit of a detail of it. And here, a slide where I compare the two images, the image of Ed Rowan on the left and Betty Sanborn on the right. And you can see in sort of very general terms why Grant saw in the art teacher, Betty Sanborn, some similarity to Ed Rowan. They both have that slightly cleft chin. They both have somewhat high cheekbones, but yet there are obviously distinctions. However, that passage from Hazel Brown's book had led some scholars along the years to suggest that the farm woman in Appraisal was actually a depiction of Ed Rowan in drag, that Grant Wood was making fun of Ed Rowan by dressing him up as a woman, when in actuality, according to Hazel Brown, and then confirmed by this information that we received from Wendy Guida, that we do have a distinct model in Betty Sanborn for the figure on the left, the farm woman, in Appraisal, and that it is not, contrary to what some people had posited in the past, it is not a depiction making fun of Ed Rowan by depicting him as a woman. Certainly, that may have been Grant Wood's original idea as he communicated it to Hazel Brown, but in the course of the creation of the painting, using Betty Sanborn as the model, he and Ed Rowan made up, and there were no hard feelings between them, and the final composition was not about making fun of Ed Rowan. Here, another picture of Rowan, and here Rowan and Betty Sanborn. Again, you can see that there are still somewhat striking characteristics between them, but really the intent might have been done out of a feeling of being irked on Grant Wood. Originally, that was not in the course of the painting the final outcome. The woman on the right, the Mary that Hazel Brown is referring to, is Mary Lackerstein, who was a very close friend of Hazel Brown's. They operated the hobby house together. And here's a terrible picture, I'm afraid, of her that kind of stolen from the newspaper archives of her. Who obviously had great influence on Grant Wood and convinced him to work out his differences with Ed Rowan, and figured, in this sort of final composition, and much more about this. This pairing, the individuals who sat for this, can be found in a recently published book by Paul Jewell called We Posed for Grant Wood. If you are interested in finding out much more about all of the different models that Grant Wood used throughout his paintings, you can find in this wonderful spiral-bound book. I'm going to hold it up here. There you go. Make sure it's in the camera frame there. And there's several pages dedicated to kind of extrapolating the story behind this painting. So while it's a strong composition and painting in its own right, and a fascinating painting that has the same level of accomplishment and success as its immediate predecessor, American Gothic, there is this fascinating backstory behind this composition. This somewhat recent discovery of the true identity of the farm woman as Betty Sanborn, and which really corroborates, given her history as an art teacher here in Cedar Rapids at the time that the painting was made, really corroborates Hazel Brown's account in her 1972 book on how this painting came to be. And so now, through all of that, through that recent development, from 2011, we now have a much fuller understanding of how the painting came to be, and who the models were that posed for him for this particular composition. So that's a very quick look at this particular painting. I'll thank you for joining me this evening for this brief look at a single work by Grant Wood. Be sure to check out our other One Night Stand programs. They are monthly, and they are all recorded and put onto our YouTube channel, as well as our quarterly Grant Wood in Focus programs, which are also recorded. So please check those out when you have a chance. A lot of fascinating information there. And it's one of our ways in which we get to share that information with a much broader audience in tiny little Zoom programs such as this. So thank you for joining me this evening, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.